She keeps a sign over her bed, my law. He rides out of Dead Man with a storm on his back and grief in his hands. A calf's bell, a lawman's knock, rustlers in the pines, and a leather sparrow left at dawn. Stay to the end if you believe respect can break ice thicker than rumor. Snow had its own kind of hush in Cottonwood Valley. It packed the pines till their limbs bowed and pushed cold light through the chinks of June Avery's cabin, a thin blue that made iron sing when it touched skin. She rose before the pail and put coffee on, the old pot black as a crow, the smell of grounds cutting through pitch and wool grease. The stove ticked, complaining, then settled to a steady thrum. Heat moved slow in winter. You learned to wait on it the way you waited on a skittish horse. June's place sat alone where the Love this tale? Hit like, share, and subscribe to keep the West wild. Timberline shouldered out into a flats of snowgrass, the creek under ice except where the current kept a slit open and talking. She kept the path from door to woodpile stomped down with a pair of men's boots she'd bought second-hand. Better leather, less foolishness. Over the bed she had hung a hand-cut plank that said, with the schoolteacher's clean letters, "My bed, my law." The words weren't a dare. They were a fence. She split kindling with neat wrist snaps, stacked it by size, swept chips with a straw broom, until the floorboards showed their gray grain. Her hands were used to order. Once they had written sums and names on a chalkboard in Kansas. Now they mended cinches for Millie Crow in town, pricked stitches so straight a saddlemaker would nod. Work was how a day stood upright. Wind came down from Dead Man Pass, long and steady, the kind that skins a man if he's out in it. June listened the way ranchers listen for a gate left open. The roof seams held. The stovepipe coughed once and cleared. The world was out there, big and blank and nobody's business. Inside, the room held to a small circle of honest things. Iron bed, peg for her coat, a plain chair by the stove, a second chair against the wall, just to balance the look of the place. She told herself that was why it stayed. In town, where men warmed their hands around cheap whiskey at the Silver Spur, they told one another she was a hard woman. Winter clear through. Old Tom Beasley, who had time enough to spend his breath on stories, would spit and say, "Ain't a man yet set a boot past her bedpost." Let winter do the courtin', boys. June never went in the spur, but news sloshed up against her porch, same as any other weather. She wasn't angry about it. Anger took energy and fed nothing. She kept to coffee, salted pork, venison she put up in fall, and the steady jobs of living. There had been a night years back when she'd pulled a stranger in from a storm and learned what thanks can sound like when a man thinks weather owes him your skin. A door can slam so hard you feel it for seasons. She learned, too, from a father who said, "Let a man die on your step and you'll hear him walk after," and from a schoolhouse fire that burned names. She still carried light as ash, heavy as iron. All of that lived quiet in her bones. Winter simply made space for it. She checked the calf bell she'd found tangled in drift brush 2 days prior. It wasn't hers. It had a deeper tone than the bells used at the Crow Spread, and she figured it belonged to Halstead Creek, Bo Halstead's brand. She hadn't met the man. Folks said he'd put his wife in the ground 2 winters ago and never raised his voice since. Grief has a way of sanding the edges off a person. It can also blunt them. By mid-morning, snow came soft, a sift that hid old tracks and made new ones look like trespass. June stepped out to the lean-to, her breath a ghost. She checked the lashings, ran a palm along the plank door, felt the wood's cold bite through her glove. The sky had that tight look storms get when they are gathering themselves. She pulled her collar up and studied Dead Man, the notch dark as a shut eye. Back inside, she trimmed the wick, set a pot of venison stew to warm, laced another row on the strap she'd promised Millie. Her needle dipped and rose, a heartbeat she could control. She kept the Winchester on the beam above the door, the way other folks kept a cross. Not to wave at company, just to remind herself this house had rules and she was the one who made them. Afternoon slid down the glass like smoke. The world outside went the color of pewter, and the wind shifted to a long north moan that made the eaves answer. June laid another split into the firebox, held her hands out, turned them to toast the backs. Heat pulled the ache from her fingers. She looked once at the spare chair, then away. A person can carry quiet like a blanket. It isn't always cold under it. Toward evening she dosed the stew with a pinch of salt and set bread near the stove to soften. Snow thickened until the pines wore it like wool. Somewhere in that white, bells would be muffled. Hooves would stumble. Men would curse the pass and make promises to whatever they believed in. June believed in wood stacked straight, boots dried upside down, and doors that open only when you mean it. She drew the latch bar up a notch so it would fall easy if the wind worked at it. Not kindness, just habit. Old country ways keep you standing. Outside, the world leaned its shoulder against the cabin. Inside, the lamp lifted a small gold circle and held it steady. June listened to the wind talk around the corners and to the stove answer in little ticks, and she thought, if winter was set on matchmaking, it could court the empty chair first. Dead Man Pass pinched the sky down to a slit and let the wind whistle through like a knife in a sheath. Bo Halstead leaned forward in the saddle, chin tucked, hat brim iced into a hard rim. Dusty took the grade with his ears laid back, chest lacing steam. Snow came crossways, needles at first, then a steady pour that ate the world a fence post at a time. Bo had meant to set salt at the far tanks and swing wide to look for the bell calves that slipped his fence 3 days back. They carried deep-toned collars, Halstead bells, not the tinny kind the Crow outfit used. And that sound, once heard, sat in your head like a church note. He'd been hunting that note since sunup, turning the old horse into every gully that might hold a lee. The weather had other ideas. He could taste iron in the air the way you can sometimes before a storm shakes from gray to white. He pulled his scarf higher till it iced to his breath. The trail went soft, then gone, just drift backs and faint changes in the skin of the snow where grass had held it up. Dead reckoning and old habit kept him from circling. That and the memory of men who had. Easy, boy, he told Dusty, though the horse knew his business better than advice. The gelding felt for footing, shouldered wind like an old mule, slid once to the hock and caught himself with a grunt. Bo let the reins run a finger's width, trusting. The pass funneled sound so the storm seemed to breathe. Long in and long out, like some big animal bedded down over the mountains. Bo's coat was moleskin darkened with wet. The wool under it drank melt and gave back a sour, warm smell. His gloves had gone from stiff to worse. He could still move his fingers, but not quick. That was fine. There was nothing worth doing fast out here. He thought of Ruth then, because winter always brought her around. The way she laughed at the first ditch, so squeak of packed snow. How she'd tuck hot stones in the bed and act surprised they worked. 2 winters since the fever took her, and he'd learned how quiet a house can be when it doesn't have somebody singing leaking out of it. Grief didn't stop a day, but it rode it. Same as any weight you learn to carry without talking about it. By mid-afternoon, the sky had settled into that pewter shade that says dark will come early whether you like it or not. Bo checked his pocket watch by feel, found it, and didn't bother to read it. The snow would lie about the hour, anyhow. He angled off the main cut to ride a timbered shoulder where the pines threw what shelter they could. Limbs sagged with white, then shrugged and sent a cold shudder down his back, like the trees were taking a mean pleasure in sharing. He pulled up once, thinking he caught a bell in the storm's voice, but it was only the wind working a snag. He swore low, not at the wind, just to keep his mouth moving, A man who goes still in weather like this can forget to start again. Dusty pricked an ear. Bo followed it and saw nothing but blown gray. Then the gray lifted a breath, and in that breath a yellow pinprick winked and was gone. He blinked ice off his lashes and eased the horse toward where it might have been. The pinprick showed again, steadier this time, a lamp or a lie. Out here it could be both. Bring your feet, old son, he told Dusty and the horse. They dropped out of the pass proper into a cut where drifts lay smoother, and the light grew, not bright, but faithful. A cabin sat tucked at the edge of pine, roof shouldered in snow, stovepipe making a thin smear against the gray. The lamp in the window made a gold coin of a square. He knew the place from talk, the Avery woman's, though he'd never had cause to ride this far down Cottonwood. Men in town said she was winter clear through, a bed with a law on it, and the kind of eyes that counted change exact. Bo had never much cared for other men's talk. He cared for roofs that held, and doors that latched, and stoves that burned when you fed them right. He swung down slow, legs numb enough to make the ground feel hollow. Dusty stood with his head low, blowing, grateful and pretending not to be. Bo led him to the lee side of the shed, looped the reins on a peg, and ran a hand along the horse's neck. The hair was crusted white in ridges. He knocked ice out of the bit with his knuckle, gentle as he could manage. The wind tried to peel him off the yard. He hunched into it and took the 2 steps to the porch. Snow coming to mid-calf, boots squeaking the way cold leather does when it gives just a little. The lamp threw him a narrow path, all the rest of the world falling away into gray noise. He took off his glove and flexed his fingers till they stung. No sense knocking if you couldn't feel the wood. He looked once over his shoulder at the pass, already closing like a door pushed by a big hand. Then he faced the cabin. A man asks help plain or he doesn't deserve it. Bo set his knuckles to the plank, drew a breath that burned, and lifted his hand to knock. The knock sounded like bone on wood, 3 plain raps that didn't beg. June set her palm on the door and felt the storm leaning there too, a steady shove. She slid the latch not all the way and let the door crack. Cold came in first, a clean blade. Then a man's hat brim, iced hard, the drip off it ticking the porch plank. Her Winchester was already braced along the beam. She didn't aim it, she let him see it had a place here same as the stove did. He stood big in the seam of light, coat gone gray with wet, scarf hoard to his breath. His eyes were the tired blue you get from looking into wind too long. He tipped his chin, not bold, not small. "Ma'am," he said, voice low from the cold, "ain't looking to stay, just not keen on dying on your doorstep." June's father's sentence rose up on its own. Let a man die on your step, and you'll hear him walk after. The words had weight, so did the plank over her bed. My bed, my law. She opened the door as far as her shoulder, no wider. "Boots on the porch," she said. "Hat, too. My bed stays mine, floor by the stoves, all you get." "Yes, ma'am." He didn't argue the terms. He bent, pulled at frozen leather till it creaked, lit the boots, side by side under the eave, brushed ice off the crown of his hat with a gloved thumb, then hung it on a nail by the jamb without asking. Wet steamed off him like a spirit leaving. "Horses in your lee," he added. "Name's Dusty." "Tackle hold, leave him his head," she said. "Wendell play tricks with rope knots." He unwrapped his scarf slow so the ice would let go, worked his fingers until the blood woke mean. June stepped back exactly 1 pace, no more. He crossed the sill careful as if the line were chalk and he'd learned not to smudge it. Snow jumped from his coat and pattered the floorboards. She pointed with her chin to a plank by the hearth. "That's your ground," she said. "You can steam there and not wander." Much obliged. He moved to the fire and squatted, hands out, turning them, palms then backs, a man who'd done it 1,000 nights. The stove took him in by degrees. He didn't look at the bed, he looked at the stovepipe and the seam where it met the collar. Habit, she thought, the kind men bring that's worth something. June shut the door, dropped the latch, hung the bar so it would fall if the wind worked at it. She wiped the wet with a rag and set the rag to dry on the poker. The room changed just by having another breath in it. Not bigger, tighter, like a cinch pulled one hole. "You from Halstead Creek," she said, not asking. "Yes, ma'am." Beau Halstead, he kept his eyes on the flames. "Got bells out this way, or I did." "I heard one." She kept her voice even. "Found a bell strap tangled in brush." Deeper tone than crows. "You'll have your calves back come weather." He nodded once, the way men nod when there's a ledger in their heads, and they've written your name under the column that says square. Steam lifted off his sleeves and made small clouds in the lamplight. He slid a hand inside his coat, slow and plain, and pulled a pocket knife. He opened it and cut the ice out of his scarf fringe so it wouldn't melt down his neck. Then he closed the knife, wiped it on his knee, and set it on the hearthstone where she could see it sit. "Knife stays there," she said. "Reckon so." The wind shoved at the north wall. The cabin answered with a low groan like an old tree learning a new angle. June felt the give in the rafters through the soles of her feet. She lifted her face, listened, and heard the pipe cough once, just a bubble in the draw. "You've got a nail loose in that collar," the man said, soft. "Could set it back easy if you've a mind." "My house holds," she said, then added, because the house liked honesty, "for now." He didn't smile. He didn't do anything with his face at all. He just warmed and steamed and kept his bulk compact so his shadow didn't reach where it wasn't wanted. Water ticked from his coat hem to the hearth, slow as a clock. June hung her coat back on its peg, set her palm on the carved plank above the bed like a woman checks a gate latch, then let it go. She went to the stove, lifted the lid with the hook, and fed a split through the red. The heat rose, threw light up her sleeve. She set the lid back, square and neat. "Rules are simple," she said. "You sleep on the floor by the fire. You don't cross where I point." She toed a line in the dust between chair and cot. "You don't touch what you didn't bring. You leave when the pass will let you." "Yes, ma'am," he said again, the words shaped clean, no rub in them. He eased down from the squat to a sight and took off his gloves, laid them palm to palm on the hearthstone. His hands were nicked and chapped, the kind that do work until they forget to bleed. He didn't hold them out to her name, and she didn't give it. Names could wait. Weather couldn't. For a time the cabin spoke for both of them, the soft ticking of pine pitch, the north moan in the stovepipe, the little hiss where snow met iron and died. June felt the old math take hold, the tally of warmth, wood, hours till gray turns to black. One more mouth to heat, one more back to turn to the wind if the roof asked. She set a kettle toward the hotter ring and heard the water think about it. "There's coffee," she said at last. "Black." "No sugar, black'll do," he said. "Most things do." She poured, handed the tin cup across the air without stepping into his square. He reached from his side without leaning into hers. The cup changed hands clean. He drank and shut his eyes at the first swallow, the way men do when heat finds a cold place inside and makes room. Outside, the pass shut another inch. Inside, the circle of lamplight held steady. June kept her rifle where it was and her rules where they belonged, and a stranger's breath moved slow and even by her stove, while winter gathered its shoulders for a longer shove. Heat crawled back into the room the way a cat finds its old spot. Slow, claiming inches, wet steamed off the man and made halos in the lamp glow. June set the kettle to a hotter ring, then lifted the lid hook and fed the box stove a split no bigger than her wrist. Pine pitch answered with a sharp pop, then settled. The stranger, Beau Halstead by his say, kept his hands over the iron, turning them like he was remembering where his fingers lived. He blew into the cup and took another swallow. "Wind'll skin a man clean tonight," he said, voice made easier by heat. "Not if that stovepipe sits straight," June said. He looked at the collar without moving his boots. "You got a square nail?" "Short one." She hesitated, then stepped to the pegboard and fetched a tobacco tin marked "Nails" in pencil. She set it on the table midway between them, a truce line, and pointed. He came only as far as his side of that table, tipped the tin, chose 2 nails with the care of a man picking seed. No reach, no crowding. June climbed the chair, braced a palm to the beam, and rocked the stovepipe just enough to show the looseness. Bo stood where he was and raised the hammer, then waited. She realized she'd still got her knife in her hand from splitting kindling earlier. She looked at the blade, then at him, and crossed to the shelf. The knife went up there, spine to the wall. A small thing, a loud thing. Bo gave one clean tap, metal seated. The pipe drew like a throat cleared. He put the hammer and the extra nail back in the tin, then slid the tin toward her with 2 fingers, as if pushing back a borrowed word. Steam had worked the stiffness out of his coat. He shrugged it off, careful not to fling melt, and draped it over the back of the spare chair, far side from the bed, as if he knew the geography without a map. The coat shed a slow rain that powdered into a tin plate. June slid under it. He noticed and nodded, thanks, without clutter. June ladled venison stew into a bowl and set it on the edge of his heat with a heel of bread. "You eat, you scrub your bowl," she said. "Soap's under the sink." "Yes, ma'am." He waited until she stepped back before reaching. He ate without noise, spoon steady, eyes not roaming. Men told on themselves with their eyes. His kept to the stew and the orange square of fire. When he finished, he did as told. Rinsed, soaped, rinsed again, set the bowl mouth down to dry, and then he stood there with his big hands empty, not sure where to put them. June fetched a folded spare blanket from the chest and dropped it by the hearth, just touching the toe of his boot. He didn't pick it up right away. He looked to the bed, then away, as if to say he understood what that blanket was and wasn't. Outside, the wind leaned fresh against the north wall. The cabin gave a soft groan in its ribs. Snow sifted from the roof edge in slow drapes past the window, a curtain pulled by an unseen hand. The world beyond that pane was a gray that had eaten all the edges. Bo unlashed his bedroll and shook it once, quiet. He laid it down so that the foot of it pointed to the door, and the head faced the stove, a measured distance from June's cot you could mark with a stick. He spread the spare blanket and folded back a corner like a man minding a room he didn't own. "Horse'll do," he said after a while, answering a question she hadn't asked. "Shed breaks the push." I left him his head and a mood to work the bit free. June's ear ran to the pipe, to the stove's tick, to the rafters speaking their old language. "Roof's tight yet," she said. "Seams'll sing some. That's just wood remembering where it wants to be." He grunted assent, then reached inside his shirt and fetched a little leather kit, the kind that rides pocket. He didn't open it. He set it on his side of the table and rested his palm on it like a man who's learned to keep busy when quiet gets too loud. The kettle shouldered into a boil. June poured more coffee. She slid his cup across the table until its tin lips shone in his square. He lifted it and sipped. "You keep books straight," he said, glancing at the tidy shelf, the broom hung by its string, the boots on the porch set pairwise. "Books don't keep themselves," she said. "Nor houses." He looked at the carved plank over the bed and didn't try to read it out loud. "Respect can be seen. It doesn't need naming." He eased back onto his heels, then to the blanket. He sat, tugged at his socks, wrung them, and laid them near but not over the stove. He placed his gloves thumb up so the heat would walk into the fingers, not trap in the wrists. A man who had made mistakes and learned their cost. The light settled down, lamplight buttery against the iron, firelight copper. June felt breath move easier in her chest. Not safe. Safe was a word townsfolk used. Just set right for the hour. She took the hook again, set one more split on. The stove ticked its approval. "Rules stand," she said. "They hold," he answered. Words done, the room took back the talk, the long throat of wind, the pipe's steady draw, the soft crackle of pitch. Two shadows lay on the plank floor, one longer, one square, not touching. The bed kept its law, the stove kept its bargain, and outside, winter pressed its ear to the wall, listening for any promise it might test come night. Toward full dark, the roof changed its talk. It stopped ticking polite and started groaning deep, a barn animal sound that came from ribs in history. Wet snow will do that, load a house till it remembers its age. June felt it through the floorboards, a slow shiver under her boots. "Roof's taking weight," she said. Bo was already on his knees, palm flat to the plank, like he could listen with bone. "She's bowing a hair at the ridge." He stood, shrugged into his damp coat, and looked to the door. "You got a ladder, or you climb by habit?" "By habit." She fetched a coil of rope and a short prop board she kept for storms, the end cut to a snug angle. "You brace from inside?" "I'll send you the pull other way," he said, calm as if they were arguing fence wire, not the roof over their heads. "I ride tops." You plant the prop, June weighed it, then nodded once. She hauled the latch bar and wind-shouldered inside like a rude cousin. The lamplight jumped. Bo slipped out, took the rope, and vanished into blown white. June got the prop under the ridgepole and levered her shoulder into it. Breath short from the cold pour through the open door. Overhead, boots thumped and slid. Snow hissed off eaves in sheets. She heard Bo's voice once, a wordless hawk of sound to mark his place. Then the shovel bite, scrape, toss, steady, certain. The house eased a whisper. The prop sang against the wood, a small honest vibration in her arm. From the timberline came a long braided howl that set the hair along her neck up. Wolves work edges when weather pins the big things. Another howl answered closer in the trees. June's hands found more bite on the prop. The wind bent and sent a new load of snow across the roof. Bo shoveled it clean again. Rhythm made courage. He dropped back through the door, by and by, rhymed and grinning without the ground touching anything but his teeth. "She'll hold," he said, shaking melt from his hat brim. Then he stopped, head cocked. Through the storm noise, a thin note threaded the room, so small you might mistake it for hinge squeak if you didn't know. He knew, so did she. "Calf," they said together. It came again, high, raw, a baby voice strung tight with cold. June snatched the lantern, boxed the flame with her hand, and grabbed a burlap sack from the peg. Bo took the sack without a word, and went first into the yard's gray boil, shoulders bent. The sound pulled them like a wire. They found it canted in a drift near the lean-to. Snow combed up along its hide where it had tried to bed out of the wind. The bell strap under its jaw wore the deep tone she'd heard before, deadened now by packed ice. Its muzzle was crusted white, breath ragged. "Easy, little one," June said, the voice you use for hurt animals and spooked kids. She slid the lantern to Lee and knelt, fingers going blind with cold even inside the glove. Bo rocked the calf to its chest and scooped it. Back under his forearms, forelegs tucked. He staggered once on the drift lip and caught himself with a grunt. They shouldered the door to the lean-to, got the calf onto old hay, and dropped burlap over it. June had a crock of bear grease for winter lungs. She hooked the lid with her thumb, scooped a double handful, and worked it into the calf's chest and throat, quick and mean, the way a midwife works. No fuss, all purpose. The smell came up strong and animal, cut with smoke and tallow. Bo slid the lantern low, close enough to share heat without courting flame. The calf rolled a cloudy eye and bawled soft, a protest that sounded like a promise to keep trying. "Woke to it," Bo said, not looking at her. She did. "You're not dying in my shed, honey." Not tonight. Wind tested the siding. The wolves sang again, farther now, losing interest once the easy thing moved inside the circle of people. Bo found old sacks and made a collar to keep the bell from freezing into the hair. He freed the tongue of the bell, and it gave one honest note, deep as a cup set on a table. He smiled at that without showing it. "Halstead iron," he said, almost to himself. June pulled the calf's ears through her hands, warming cartilage. She felt the life in it thicken under her palms. Breath evened, slowed. The eyes quit rolling and started watching. "There you are," she told it. "That's the road." They stood a minute in the lean-to breath halo, letting the little body learn heat again. Their shoulders almost touched, and didn't. The rope of quiet between them had more strands in it now. Work laid together, a thing saved that couldn't save itself. Those are strands that hold. Back in the cabin, June stomped snow off the threshold and kicked the door to. Bo followed, shutting the storm outside to its own business. He shed coat and shook the shovel-ache from his hands. "Thank you," June said, surprising herself. She didn't use that word often. It stretched something in the room when you let it out. "How's thanks me?" he said, near smiling. "You kept it from second." We split the chore. June set the bear grease crock by the hearth to keep it soft, reached for the stew pot without thinking, and ladled him another bowl. He took it with that same careful reach as before, not crossing the line she'd laid. He ate slower now, more to warm his insides than to fill a want. They didn't speak about the bed. They didn't need to. The law over it carved cold and clear as ever. What had changed was smaller and bigger both. A roof that held because two people made it hold. A bell that would ring in someone else's yard come thaw because they'd said it would. Wind ran a long hand along the north wall, looking for a catch. The stove drew steady. The calf in the lean-to made a small, thick sound, sleep with breath to spare. June felt her shoulders drop that last inch they'd been riding up near her ears. She poured coffee for them both and set his cup in the measured place. He lifted it. Their fingers never met. Heat did the touching for them, simple and clean, in a room that smelled of pine and tallow and saved life. Night laid itself flat against the windows till the panes turned into small black mirrors. The stove glowed a slow red under its iron lips, and the ash settled in soft sighs like a tired animal changing how it breathed. June eased the poker through the coals, not to stir them high, just enough to keep their back warm. Heat walked off the iron and made a circle that would hold so long as someone minded it. Bo sat close, not touching the stove's leg. Boots set heel to heel, hat on the floor with the crown up so luck wouldn't spill. He took that small leather kit he'd laid out earlier and opened it in the measured light. A scrap of saddle-weight hide, a blunt stylus, a few stamps, a palm mallet with the shine worn where fingers insist. He drew a swallow's worth of water from his cup and brushed it across the leather till it darkened and relaxed, the smell of wet hide rising soft and clean. "You work leather," June said, not a question so much as a name for what she was seeing. "Hands, remember," he answered. "Shishpashit." He set the stylus and pressed a line, gentle as a whisper, curving toward a shape only he could see. After Ruth. If I didn't give 'em a thing to do, they set to pullin' at me. He tilted the scrap so the lamplight caught the mark, then tapped a border in with the smallest stamp, the mallet making a low, even thock that nestled into the stove's steady draft. "She put hot stones in the bed come frost," he said, voice even, not trying to dress the picture, sang off key and smiled like it weren't a fault. Fever took her fast. House got loud with the quiet after. Couldn't stand a chair scuff without thinking it was her. June watched his hands find the pace. The calf in the lean-to gave a thick, satisfied breath, a small saw going steady now. Outside, the wind changed notes and wandered further down the draw, like it had been called elsewhere. June set her elbows on her knees, felt the knit of her sleeves pull at her shoulders, and kept her eyes on the scrap, not his face. Grief told easier if you weren't being stared at. "The schoolhouse in Kansas burned," she said, voice dry as cedar. "Potbelly stove kicked ash and found the sawdust under the dais. I got the children out, most. Folks needed someone to blame that wasn't a cold stove and a cheap floor. When a man at the hardware used me for a laugh, said I saved the boys I liked first, my father put his hand on my shoulder and said we could be gone by daylight. I let the door shut on all their names. It still knocks sometimes. Bo kept his hands moving the whole while, not out of rudeness, but the way a trail horse keeps chewing when the rider tells a hard thing. "You carry 'em," he said. Not an apology, a fact. "Names are light," she answered, "but they hang, heavy, just the same." He turned the leather and cut a small, sure curve. A sparrow started to show under a bent pine bough, head tucked, feathers suggested more than drawn. He beveled the bird from the field so it rose a thumb's width, a small life shaped out of the same hide that could bind a cinch. He thumbed the edges to soften them and set a stamp for the eye. One tap, no more. "A small bird lives on shelter," he said. "Ain't ashamed of it." June nodded once. The words sat right in the room. She leaned back to the chair, the wood easing under her weight, and touched the plank over the bed with 2 fingers. My bed, my law. Like a woman checking the rope on a water bucket. The letters were cool. Bo laid the mallet down and breathed on the leather to coax a little more warmth into it. He rubbed a thumb of oil into the cut lines so they went dark and stayed. The scrap turned from a piece of something to a little story a hand could carry. He set it on the table between them, not pushed across, not hoarded back, just there. He didn't reach his hand toward the line June had towed earlier. He didn't even shift his bedroll closer by an inch. He watched the stove, then the leather, the way men watch a horse that's lame and stand with it, because there's nothing else that helps. "I don't take what ain't offered," he said finally, the words steady as fence posts. June let them stand a breath, 2. The stove popped a seed of pitch that flashed and died. She looked to the drawn line on the floor, and then to him. "And I won't offer what I can't live with after." Nothing moved then but heat. The talk of it went up the pipe and out into a sky that had quit testing the roof for the hour. The calf shifted straw and rang its bell once, low and pure like a church note heard from far off. June's mouth relaxed at the corners. It was not a smile the way townsfolk mean it. It was something that hurt less. Bo gathered his tools and wrapped them in the scrap of cloth they came in, slow and neat. Hands quiet now they'd had their say. He set the bundle by his hat and pulled the spare blanket to his knees. He blew out his breath and let his shoulders sag. The last little bit of day keeps on a man. June stood and poured water from the kettle into a basin till steam lifted soft. She rinsed the soot from her fingers and dried them on a bit of flour sack that had seen too many summers. She looked to the door latch, to the bar that would fall if the wind worked at it, to the pegs, with her coat and his coat hanging separate and sensible. She dropped another split in the box stove and set the hook down just so. "Pass might open by noon if the wind minds itself," she said. "I'll take it when it does," he answered dead. "Leave the place as I found it." A glance to the roof. "Maybe stronger." June tipped her head. "Maybe." She crossed to the table and with a single, exact motion, turned the leather scrap so the bird faced the bed, not the door. Then she went to her cot and sat on the edge and unlaced her boots, set them side by side beneath the plank, like a woman who keeps her house the way she keeps her word. She lay back with her hair still braided, and her hand over her belly where the cold likes to find you, and watched the stove paint the rafters red-brown. Bo rolled onto his side to show her his back, the courtesy of a trail partner and a man who sleeps near strangers, without making them so. The room settled around their breaths, hers shallow at first, then deeper, his long and even from a life of early mornings and hard stock. The ash in the stove made that small snoring sound it makes when it is content to hold until someone tends it. Somewhere beyond the eaves the wolves drifted to other business, and the winter quiet came honest. The law over the bed held, the kindness between the chairs held, and the little bird under the pine bough waited on the table for whatever light tomorrow cared to bring. Morning came cold and pewter, the kind that doesn't bother with color. The stove's ash wore a thin skin of white where June had let it idle. She broke it with the poker and fed in a split the size of her wrist. Heat woke slow, like an old dog lifting its head. In the lean-to the calf huffed and gave one hoarse, serviceable bawl. Good. Bells draw trouble, breaths keep a house. Bo stepped out at first light to lay a hand on Dusty and check the sky. The wind had turned from a fist to a flat palm. Dead Man sat dark and tight, but the pass had the look of a door not quite latched. He came back in stamping frost from his socks, hair rimed along the edges like he'd earned his gray. "Road's thinking on opening," he said. "Let it think," June answered, tying her braid tighter. She set coffee to climb just under a simmer and listened to the world. Rafters quiet, stovepipe drawing clean, no wolf song where the timber thins. Beneath all that, another sound, a far thin creak and a jingle of hardware, not wolves. Tack. A shadow slid across the window. A knuckle tapped twice, lawman polite, not storm desperate. June's eyes went to the sparrow on the table, Bo's leather scrap, then to the line she'd towed on the floor. She turned the scrap face down with 2 fingers and lifted the latch. Deputy Reed stood on the porch with frost ghosting his mustache, and his coat buttoned wrong in the half-light. His sorrel blew steam and chewed the bit like it had opinions. Reed tipped his hat to the exact inch respect requires, and peered past June at the stove glow. "Mornin', Miss Avery." "Sorry to trouble. You heard anything in the night?" "We got sign of rustlers cuttin' fence up valley, wagon ruts where no wagon ought to be. I'm huntin' bells sound, deep, kind. Halstead metal, by the ring." June had her shoulder in the door, just enough that the room behind her was heat and shadow. "Storm sang plenty," she said. "Roof groaned. Wolves tuned up and quit. Heard a bell once thin. Could be any lost thing." Deputy Reed's gaze went to her boots, lined on the porch, then to the drift scrolled by the steps where snow had taken prints and blurred them into a general story. Bo had shoveled a clean path last night. The wind had kindly licked it smooth again. Mercy comes in strange forms. "That your smoke I seen round too?" Reed asked mild. "Or you keep an all-night stove for company?" "My stove keeps for me," June said. She let a little of the teacher into it, the old iron that makes a boy sit up straighter without knowing why. Reed's interest slid off the jam and into the yard. He wasn't a hard man, just a man with a job and a long winter saddle under him. "We got tracks where a team cut toward Cottonwood, then lost in drift. If you see strangers, you stay doors. Rustlers get jumpy when feed gets scarce." June nodded. "Doors got a latch and a bar, always did. The calf in the lean-to chose that exact minute to clear its throat like a farmhand." Reed's eyes ticked toward the shed. June didn't blink. "Pulled a calf out of the drift," she said, before he could aim the question. "Truth is a fence you set yourself. It bawls like a tin hinge. I'll quiet its bell till weather lets me return it." Reed's shoulders lost an inch of curiosity. That deep ring I heard last night, then. He put gloved fingers to his jaw, thinking. Halstead iron, sure as Sunday. I'll ride on and flag Bo if I catch him. He'll be grateful for the save. June let the name pass like wind through needles. You find your rustlers first, deputy. He touched his brim, turned his sorrel, and rode off slow to keep the sign he meant to read. The jingle of his rig faded into the pines, and the yard went back to the small noises a place makes when it belongs to itself. Bo hadn't moved from the shadow between stove and door. He'd gone quiet the way men go when the talk outside your walls turns toward you. He looked to the table where the leather lay face down, and then to June. I can step out, make it simple, he said. Let him read what he wants in the snow. I ain't your secret to keep. June shut the door with the latch, then dropped the bar so it thudded home. A small kindness can get loud if you're careless with it, she said. Rumor rides fresh horses. Truth shows up on foot. I don't feel like shoeing the one to help the other. He held her eyes a second, gratitude without shine. I won't thicken the talk, he said. Soon as dead man yawns, I'm gone. She set the coffee on the table, not quite between their squares. You'll dampen that bell first, she said. Rustlers hear a tone like that and think the Lord himself is pointin'. They went to the lean-to together. June slipped the strap off and packed a rag under the clapper so the Halstead bell wouldn't ring if a squirrel sneezed. Bo checked the calf's gums and watched the chest lift strong. He'll walk, he said. Not far yet, but walk. Back inside, June fetched needle and waxed thread and set them on the table. For the rig you tore on dead man, she said. Practical is a safer thank you. He took the kit and ran the wax along the thread in slow pulls, the way a man settles himself when leaving starts to look near. Deputy seems decent, he said after a time. Decent don't stop a mouth, June said. Silver spurs got plenty of those. Old Tom'll keep 'em busy with stories whether he knows the truth or not. Bo's smile was there and gone. Old Tom can put daylight in a keyhole. They drank coffee and let the cabin knit itself back together from the visit. The sparrow lay under its own skin of leather, out of sight but not gone. June could feel it there, same as she could feel a warm stone in a pocket. Pass'll give about noon, Bo said again, listening to the pipe's steadier draw like it could tell time. I'll circle wide on the far bench. If rustlers are layin' sign, I'll make 'em think my tracks are yesterday's. No sense leadin' a trail to your step. You'll take the calf when you can stand it, June said. Till then, my shed's quiet. He tipped his head. Quiet's a favor folks underrate. She found herself glancing at the spare chair, how it sat right where he'd set his coat last night, the floor beneath it dry now, tin plate put away, only a darker smudge in the wood to say a storm had come and been answered. Houses, remember, in their own ways. Reed'll talk to Bo Halstead before supper, June said, half to the room, half to the day. Let the truth walk in his own boots. Bo set his cup down with no clink, a careful man's finish. Reckon he just did, he said, and stood to pull on his socks and work his feet back into stiff leather. He didn't crowd the line, he didn't look at the bed. He buckled his patient same as his spur and went to see to Dusty while the pass considered its hinge. Outside, the morning lifted a shade lighter. The fence posts showed shouldered and white, honest as ribs. In the lean-to, a calf breathed the way a stove does when the damper's set right. The law over the bed held. So did the quieter law, the one that says a person's dignity is worth more than a town's appetite. By noon, the sky unlatched a shade. Not blue, just less pewter, the kind of mercy winter gives when it's bored with being cruel. Wind went down from a fist to a hand resting on the roof. Bo pulled his coat on and stepped out with the shovel like it had been his all along. He worked without talk, cut a track from the door to the shed and another to the woodpile, wide enough for a body with a load on one hip. Shovel bit, lifted, tossed, steady. He knocked ice rags from the eaves with the back of the handle, eased a sagging shingle flat, and drove 2 short nails he found in June's tobacco tin. The hammer kept quiet on the downstroke, like a man minding a sleeping child. At the lean-to he reset the latch so drift wouldn't nose it open, and he cut a little trench to carry melt away from the sill. Payment without fuss, the kind that holds. June watched it from the doorway, with the latch string in her hand, not to keep him in, just to feel the grain of the house. His tracks laid a new map on her yard, clean lines through weight. When he came in to steam a minute, she had a bundle waiting on the table, cornbread wrapped in cloth, a small jar of coffee already ground, a length of waxed thread with 2 needles she'd sanded bright. He looked at the bundle and then to her, question in it without words. "Trail eats a man mean if he lets it," she said. "This keeps it civil." He touched the cloth like it might take a bite back. "I patched that rig from your kit," he said. "Paid my debt." "This ain't about debt," she said, then softened it. "Just bread." He tied the bundle small and flat the way cowhands do, so it rides quiet. He laid his palm once on the sparrow scrap, then lifted it and slid it back into the little leather roll with his tools, not hiding the motion and not naming it either. The calf coughed in the shed and fell quiet, the rag under its bell doing its job. Good. No music for rustlers today. Dusty stood under the shed eave, with a look that said he'd take warmth if the world meant to offer it. Bo worked the bit warm in his hands, rubbed a thumb along the gelding's jaw, where snow had burned the hair flat. He checked cinch and latigo, tugged both just enough to remember who was in charge. The horse blew and nodded, agreement between partners. Inside, June set a strip of clean cloth on the table without thinking and then moved it, because it looked like making room. She checked the coffee one last time, dosed the stove, then wiped her hands on her apron and didn't know what to do with them after. So she folded them, then unfolded them, then set them steady on the chair back, the spare chair he'd used, fingers spread like she was counting. "You'll swing wide?" she asked. "I will," he said. "Take the bench trail and lay my sign over yesterday's if I find any. Reed'll catch me, or he won't. I won't leave a straight line to your step. Take the south face once you're off, dead man," she said, hard-learned teacher in her voice. "Sun's weak, but it's still a sun. It keeps the crust honest." Bo gave that half-smile that lived in his eyes more than his mouth. "Yes, ma'am." He slung the bedroll, shouldered the bundle, sent his hat, and pulled his gloves. And for a second the room held the shape of him as if the boards could memorize. He looked everywhere but the bed. Even then, respect's a habit or it isn't anything. At the door he paused and glanced at the roof seam, then the prop she'd set under the ridge. "She's right," he said. "Storm'll test you again, but you'll answer." "I always did," June said. He stepped onto the porch. The wind found him and worried his coat, but didn't take him. He went down the shoveled path he'd made and disappeared to the shed's lee, then came back leading Dusty, the horse stepping careful into his own prints, so the ground wouldn't have to remember more than one thing. Bo put a hand to the brim, not showy, just exact. "Much obliged, Miss Ivory." June kept her shoulder in the jam and her hand on the latch, the heat of the room against her back. "Keep Dusty out of my garden come spring," she said. "Reckon we can manage that," he answered. They stood a breath with the world between them, a small yard, a shovel's worth of distance, a winter that had taken most of what it wanted for the day. Their eyes met straight on, neither asking, neither ducking. Not clinging, like the town would prefer, not cold, like the town said they were, He turned Dusty with his knees, let the gelding find the lifted track to the gate of nothing more than drift edges and memory. Snow made the only sound, soft and little, man taking care where he placed his weight. At the bend where the yard gives to the trees, he looked back once, a check the way you look at a tied knot before you trust it. June lifted the smallest part of her chin. Go on then, and he did. She watched until the dark timber swallowed the dun-tail and the hat brim and the last heartbeat of movement. Then she shut the door and dropped the bar and stood there with her palm on the wood, feeling the house readjust around the absence. It did, quick as any place taught to tend itself. She set the spare chair back a thumb closer to the stove than it had been, not because it had to sit there, but because that's where the floor showed the slight dark of melt his coat had left. She put away the tin plate that had caught that water and left the place empty on the shelf, where it liked to live just for a while. In the lean-to, the calf slept with a thick, serviceable sound, and the bell quiet under rag. June poured the last of the coffee into a cup and set another cup beside it, empty, as if cups worked better that way. Outside, Dead Man let a pale sun glance off its shoulder. The path Bo shoved would hold a day, maybe two. The law over the bed held. The smaller law did too, the one about leaving a person better than you found them and asking nothing you can't live with after. In the quiet that followed, June heard what a house sounds like when it has been seen to, a stove breathing easy, a roof at rest, and the wind, for once, passing by somebody else's door. Snow skinned over the yard by afternoon, smoothing what the shovel had said into something the wind preferred. June let it. She swept the floorboards in long pulls, the straw broom whispering like a skirt. When she finished, she set 2 cups on the table because that's how her hands made sense of the space now. One full, one turned mouth down, catching warmth in the idea of it. She moved the spare chair a thumb nearer the stove and left it there. The wood beneath still held a darker gloss. From where his coat had dripped, the boards remember with their own kind of ink. She checked the latch on the lean-to and listened to the calf breathe, heavy and serviceable. Rag tucked under the bell so the world wouldn't come asking. She rubbed a finger of bear grease into its hide, out of habit more than need. The smell of it faint now, a shadow of last night's urgency. Work sat in waiting piles. June mended a torn cinch for Millie Crow, drew her needles straight and true, wax tracing clean lines. She set a fresh peg under the saddle hook, empty, swept, waiting. She told herself for order's sake. Beside the bed she dusted the plank, my bed, my law, and for the first time since she carved it, her thumb lingered on the letters, not to harden them, but to feel the groove a touch softer. Toward evening she took the bell strap from the drift where she'd found it days back, and oiled it until the leather drank and shone. The tone would ring clean once the rag came out. She liked that truth, waiting under quiet. She wrapped the strap in a scrap of flour sack and tied it with plain twine, a parcel that knew its own home. Wind thinned. Pines gave their small, pleasant hiss like water shushing gravel. The house settled on its haunches. June poured coffee, set the second cup by reflex, and left it. There are rooms that feel larger when you let an absence sit where it sat, the way you leave a good chair pulled back as if someone just rose from it and might come in off the yard again. On the far side of the pass, Bo Halstead let Dusty pick his feet along a bench trail that held the sun, an extra breath. He saw where wagon ruts had shoved into a draw and out again, rustler signs sloppy as drunks. He set his tracks on top of the old ones to make a liar out of the date if someone cared to read it wrong. Where the trail forked, he chose the line that kept cottonwood behind his shoulder and let the storm eat his sign when it changed its mind. Near sundown he met Deputy Reed by a stand of spruce. They reined in, horses breathing plumes that crossed and vanished. "Pulled a calf out of a drift at June Avery's," Reed said without preface. He had a decent way of putting facts down like stones across a creek. Bell was Halstead iron. She'll keep it quiet till you can take it. Bo touched his brim, not to read exactly, but to the piece of news. Figured as much, he said. Owes her thanks I can't pay with talk. Then don't, Reed said. We're long on talk in town and short on men who do the right thing and leave it there. They rode a piece together, silent except for the tack, and parted at the line where their days split. Bo topped out on a little ridge and looked back without meaning to. Dead man through a smudge of dark against a paler sky. Somewhere out there, a small cabin held heat, and a calf learned to breathe easy. He put his eyes front again and let the gelding jog. At Halstead Creek Ranch the yard wore a low, familiar quiet. Bo, stabled dusty, rubbed him down with a burlap the way you talk to a good friend after a hard day. Spare words, sure hands. He checked his handful of cows that had ridden the storm under a willow bench and tossed them hay he'd stored like a man who respects winter's long reach. The bell he didn't hear where it ought to be made no itch in him now. He knew where it lay and under whose roof. That was enough. Inside his house the stove balked and then caught, learning its work same as any animal. The chair by the fire still had Ruth's old shawl. Shawl folded over the back. He'd never moved it because some things you leave in place, whether you need them or not. He poured coffee, black as creek shadow, and set it on the hearth edge, then fetched his leather tools. He cut a strap from good skirting, wide enough for a man's hand to feel proud about and soft enough not to raise a welt on a colt. He dampened it and set to work, the thock of his mallet, answering the stove's steady draw. The sparrow he tooled this time rose clearer, feathers lined with patience, head cocked like it knew a storm and liked outlasting one. Under the bird he stamped a bough not quite like pine, not quite like anything but shelter. On the far table he laid the first scrap with the little bird, the one he'd made by her stove, and kept his hands off it for a count of 10. He could have kept it. He didn't. He fitted a buckle, burnished edges until they took a shine without bragging, and rubbed oil into the cuts to wake the dark. Even his tools seemed to breathe better with the work done right. Night walked up to the windows and leaned there, same as it had at June's. Bo sat with his back to the stove and let the heat find the ache winter sets in a man. Old Tom would be in the spur, about now, peddling a version of somebody else's truth. Bo smiled into his cup, small and private. That story ain't mine to peddle, he said to the room. The room, which had learned the cost of voices, agreed. He took the finished strap in both hands and weighed it the way ranchers weigh weather, honest, with a little respect for what can't be guessed at. Tomorrow or the day after, he'd ride quiet to Cottonwood and leave it where a porch could find it, and no note, no knock. The measure of a man is sometimes how well he can leave a thing good. Back in the valley, June banked her stove and cracked the door to listen to the night. Snow had gone from speaking to breathing. She took the wrapped bell strap and set it on the empty peg under the saddle hook, tied in a way that said, "Kept for you, Bo." Then she blew the lamp and lay down, hand over the warm part of the quilt where a person keeps the cold's old habits from sneaking back in. Between two roofs, fire held, bells slept, and the winter, for once, minded its own business. Snow fell the way ash falls after a good burn, light, patient, like the sky had nothing left to prove. June rose into a room that remembered him without asking her to. The second cup sat where she'd left it, mouth down, holding a little circle of warmth the table kept for later. She checked the calf first. It breathed like a stove with the damper set just right. The rag in the bell stayed put. No music for thieves. She trimmed the lamp wick and opened the door 2 inches to read the day. Cold pushed its nose in, curious but not rude. The yard wore a new skin, clean but thin enough to show the shoveled track beneath. Out past the pines, dead man lay with its shoulders rounded, wind asleep on them. It would not stay asleep forever. Weather out here was a hand you learned not to shake until you had to. By mid-morning a horse eased out of the timber and stopped where the yard begins, pretending to be a road. June stayed by the jam, counting the breaths between hoof falls. The rider didn't come on. He sat quiet until the horse quit snorting, and then walked the animal up the track he himself had cleared 2 days back, hoof to hoof, making the path remember only one set of feet. He did not knock. He left a thing on the porch rail, set it exact with both hands. A man stepped back as if from a grave you'd finished right, and turned the horse without glancing at the window. She waited until they were gone, a dun tail taken by the trees, a hat brim losing shape in the white. Then she opened the door. On the rail lay a leather strap oiled till it held light without bragging. A sparrow rose from it under a bent bough, head tucked the way small lives tuck when storms practice. The cuts wore darkness the way creek stones wear shine. No note, no mark, but work and time. June lifted it and felt the weight the way you weigh weather, honest, not guessing at what comes next. She carried it inside and set it on the table where last night's scrap had lain, turned so the bird faced the bed, not the door. The plank over that bed read what it always read, my bed, my law, and the letters stayed cool under her palm. The law hadn't moved. Something else had. Footsteps crunched out by the road. Old Tom Beasley came along with his coat buttoned wrong and his hat pulled so low it made a lyre out of his ears. He slowed at her gate, peered at the prints without shame, and grinned like a boy caught with pie. "Winter's a matchmaker, sure as taxes," he said to the air and then to her door, though it was shut. "Whoever he is, he's got manners. We could use the kind in town." June let herself smile where nobody had to carry it for her. "Keep walking, Tom," she said under her breath, and the old man did, his stories already trying on their boots. Toward afternoon, Deputy Reed rode in the easy way men do when the day's main trouble has gone to ground. He tipped his hat, looked everywhere but the porch rail, and asked after the calf. She walked him to the lean-to where the little thing nosed hay, and breathed like it meant to keep the habit. Reed set a hand on its neck. "Bo'll be by when the pass is sure," he said. "Said to tell you he's beholden without wantin' a word for it. I prefer debts paid in chores, not talk," June said. "Man already paid you some," Reed said, nodding at the clean trenches cut for melt, and the roof seam that sat flat like it liked behaving. "Looks like he knows the rate." He rode off without a story to carry. Some men could do that. The valley changed light by degrees, pewter to dull silver to the kind of blue that runs cold, even in your teeth. June hung the strap by the bed, not on the peg by the door where guests' things go. She made room for it beside a book she'd rescued from a smoke-dark school and a tin of buttons that had outlived every dress they were cut from. The sparrow faced inward toward sleep. At dusk she took the flour sack bundle from the empty peg, the bell strap oiled and wrapped, and walked it to the lean-to. The calf chewed and blinked slow. She fitted the strap under its jaw and freed the rag from the clapper. "Let's hear you then," she said. The bell gave a single note, low, round, true, the kind that tells a yard who it belongs to. She watched the calf take that sound and keep breathing under it. "You'll go home when roads do," she told it, "not before." In the cabin, June set 2 cups again without thinking. One full, one turned down. She poured stew into a tin bowl and ate with the easy appetite of somebody who'd done enough for the day to earn it. After, she cleaned the bowl and left it upside down to dry, finding she liked the look of 2 clean circles waiting. Night leaned its shoulder to the walls. The house answered with the small talk of good timber and honest heat. June stood before the bed and read the law out loud once, quiet as prayer. "My bed, my law." She touched the leather strap a last time and felt how work can carry a man across distance without trespass. Respect was a kind of trail, too. You could ride it without leaving a mark a town could sell. She lay down and pulled the quilt up and tucked her hand where the cold looks first. The room held the shape of another breath without needing it. Out in the trees some large bird stirred and settled. Down in the shed a bell breathed with a calf. Somewhere beyond Deadman, a man turned his own stove, checked his own roof, and let his house talk back to him, in the night like decent places do. June closed her eyes. "That'll do, little sparrow," she said to the leather, to the calf, to herself. "That'll do. When winter finally minds its manners, some houses stay warmer because two people chose decent over easy. That's the kind of West I like. Small mercies, boundaries kept, and a quiet gift left where a porch can find it. If this story sat right with you, tell me so the simple way. Comment 0 if you felt the respect. Comment 1 if the leather sparrow got you. And if you want more slow-burn trail tales, storms, stoves, and lives held together by plain kindness, subscribe and ride along for the next campfire